right, welcome to another edition of Hoover's History. We're just going to dive right on into Chapter 10, Section 3. This is the age of Jackson, Andrew Jackson. So before we go into talks about Adams and Jackson and conflict, let's talk about Andrew Jackson himself as an individual. I think it's important for us to know that what kind of guy we're going to deal with here, because he's not all that might say he's plain, but he does have a fiery background. As a child, he grows up. He's got Scott-Irish background of parents. His father dies when he's about 2 years old. He does have an older brother, and let's see. I think it was around when he was 13 years of age. He was with his mother and his brother, and they were couriers for the Revolutionary War. And they were I believe they were in a barn and in a loft. Major British officer came up to him and found the boys and came up to Andrew and said, the famous words, "Clean my boots." And of course, this really set off Jackson, and he stood his ground. I'll give him that. And he said, "I'm a prisoner of war, and I should be treated as such." And then this is another instance to where he's gonna remember this for the rest of his life, because he's gonna carry a scar. So, officer draws his sword and takes a swing at Jackson's head. So the first thing that Jackson does, like anybody else would, and that's to block it with his hand. And so he's got a saber mark that goes across his palm of his hand and then cuts him in the forehead. So he's going to carry that for the rest of his life as a reminder. So he's not a big proponent of the British. Now, he is going to be taken away to a prison, and it's about 40 miles away. There they basically, he and his brother contract a common disease of smallpox, and the mother shows up at the prison and pretty much just begs for his life like any mother would do. So she does get them back and released, and then they have one horse. I believe. I don't think there were two. There might have been two. And anyhow, there's three of them. And what happens is Andrew Jackson, the youngest, has to walk because his eldest brother is more sick than he. So on the way back on the trip, his older brother does die, and so that leaves him all alone with his mother. And then she, about 6 months later, she'll pass away also. Now, Andrew is over the smallpox, and he makes it through, pulls through. So, and that basically is where he is left as an orphan. So we're going to check out his early youth here and see what's going on. So, he's going to go with his uncle, and he's going to be 17 years of age. He sets out to become, so he's 13 to 17, so that's where he's at. So 17, he's going to basically run away from his uncle. And he becomes, he becomes a lawyer, and at the age of 17. So he's in North Carolina at the time, Salisbury, North Carolina, and he hooks up with a pretty good lawyer, a very prominent individual to study with, and he takes him under his wing, and he teaches him the trade. Now, if you take a look at Jackson's early letters that he wrote, he would misspell the same word in just, like one document 5 different times. So he wasn't too literal on that skill. And then, if we take a look at his his writings, they're full of fire and just it's the meaning behind the writing, not necessarily the grammar and those errors. So he writes with passion. Um, and he goes ahead and he's in these early years in North Carolina, and then he's going to move up into Tennessee. He's going to settle. So he settles in there, and that's where the Hermitage is. So that's where he's going to be meeting some other individuals throughout his life. So there were very few lawyers, anyhow, in the state of Tennessee. That's why it was a good move for him to go up there. Land was new and it was changing hands day by day. Very cheap, though. We talked about moving westward, and it was cheap. Appreciating this land grab for himself. So he's now 21 years old, and he's had a pretty wild childhood. So very mischievous, and he gambled a lot when he was a teenager. He was always in trouble. He just wasn't maturing like he should have, so he's kind of stuck. And then he tried to figure out that there is another way, and he started to look at it as becoming a gentleman. And this is age 21. So it says that he is challenged to a duel at this early age. So he it says he's challenged with a duel if basically the offender was considered a gentleman also, and said otherwise the whipping or basically a caning would ensue. Indeed, Jackson was that first year on a dueling ground for reasons unknown, and fortunately both parties after the decision agreed to fire into the air and discuss his honor. Actually, he does get into that duel, his first one. So it's just about an honor. So Jackson is coming up to becoming a man, so he's a lawyer, and also he becomes a judge. Now, there's one instance in the judge I think was pretty interesting. There was a gentleman who had dual pistols, and this is also in Tennessee, and Jackson was the judge at the time. It's a small judge, and he took it in his own hands, in his own manner, to take care of this individual because no one else would, because they were so frightened of him. And when Jackson approached the individual, he basically raised his pistol at him, and didn't have to say much, but he told him to go ahead and drop his weapons. And my memory serves me right, the individual looked right into Jackson's eyes, and then he dropped his pistols. And he'll be asked later. He said, "Well, why did you drop your pistols for Jackson and not for the other individuals who talked to you, previous?" And he said, "Well, with Jackson, I saw fire in his eyes. In other words, he's going to shoot. Whereas the other individuals, he didn't see that." So Jackson has got this, stare, I believe, in that he could just look at you in the eye, and pretty much you would just, quiver right there. So that's just his personality. So that's a little part of Jackson as well, and with his bio. And he's also going to get into a famous duel. We'll go ahead and go over that right now. With Charles Dickens. Dickinson is it's a race. He loved horses. Both Dickinson and Andrew Jackson. So Andrew Jackson loved breeding horses. and that was one of his hobbies and passions that he enjoyed. So he, at this time, he is married to Rachel, and there's a complication behind that. And the book doesn't bring this up, and I think it should be. And Rachel has had been married to another man, and then she leaves him, and Jackson is there, and pretty much they run off and get married, and that would be in a Spanish, basically in the Spanish territory, and not the United States. And then they come back to the United States, saying that they've been married by a Catholic priest, which there's no record of. And later on, they'll get married in the United States because this really is a problem. So, Rachel's first husband was supposed to be pretty much, I don't know about physically, but definitely verbally abusive to her. And Jackson didn't want, Rachel didn't want any more of him, so I'm sure Jackson, took care of. I think they did love each other an awful lot and deeply. I believe that with seeing her letters that survived the fire there. But if we get back to that, the duel here with Charles Dickinson. Dickinson, like I said, he is betting. They're both betting on their horses, and there is a instance where Dickinson calls basically Rachel an adulteress, and Jackson wants satisfaction. Now, Charles Dickinson is like the best duelist in the area, so not somebody that you really want to throw, the gauntlet down and say, I want to go ahead and challenge you to a duel. And Jackson had a plan with this whole thing to play out. So we have Dickinson and we have Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson was he wasn't like a tight dresser, where it's all tailored. His clothes were pretty much loose and maybe a little off to one side or the other, which played out to be his benefit. So we have Dickinson and Jackson, and Jackson has the plan of taking the first shot to his body, not firing the first shot, but literally taking it, and hopefully surviving that, and then returning around. And that does happen. Luck would have it. Jackson, his buttons on his coat is what Dickinson was firing from, because it's a straight line. So you just aim basically at the heart and a little to the left, and then you're right there. Middle sternum to the left, and then you have the heart. So Jackson's buttons weren't lined up exactly right, and Dickinson took the shot and hit Jackson, missed his heart by 2 inches. And I don't know how this happened, or he could do this, but Jackson stands there with his hand over his wound, and he draws his pistol and takes his time. And now Dickinson is probably freaking out by this time, and he just lets it go. He doesn't shoot up. Nobody shoots up in the air on this one. So Jackson, pops him and puts him down right there, and that's the fate. Now he'll carry that bullet around for him for the rest of his life, because it was too deep to do any surgery with, that close to the heart or anything. So there's the famous Dickinson duel and Andrew Jackson. That is a very, and this is going to be an ongoing kind of event with Rachel. That's why I wanted to bring it up. And eventually they will get married, completely legal, without any kind of basically undertone about who she is. and they'll the politicians will attack her, and to get to Jackson, and Jackson really does get upset. So that right there is Jackson's early childhood. So he starts out as an orphan, and then he has a rough time of it trying to get grow up, and he's wild, not tamed at all. He bops around here to there, and then he goes to Tennessee, so becomes a lawyer, and he finds a trade, and then the judge, and we're finally getting to the point to where he's going to get interested in politics. So that's the first part there. It says Adams and Jackson in conflict. So we're going to talk about that now. Andrew Jackson is definitely not a wealthy man, but Rachel was. I mean, she did have some money, and here he's going to be. Andrew Jackson's going to be president of the United States once he's elected from 1829 to 1837 for 2 terms. So, and basically marking an opening for more democratic era in American politics than ever, because they can start looking at the common man. You're going to hear that a lot, the common man. So Andrew Jackson did get wealth through Rachel, so he is a wealthy man by the time he became president. However, he began life, like we said, very, let's say, humbled. And they'll say that in the book, his humble beginnings. So he has some difficult time, and he becomes from the judge part, from that portion, he's going to jump into basically being in the army. He's going to join the military. So during a difficult march, he's already called up. They're going to go down to Louisiana the first time, and they're going to be going back. And so he goes down to Louisiana. This is against the British again, the War of 1812, with his troops. And it's no party going down, and then, like I said, they get called back. So he had to fit the bill and pay for all his boys to go back. Now he didn't have to go himself. He could have caught a ship or taken off ahead, but he stayed with his men. So he is a good leader, an individual to look upon. And he's taken all of this. He's been sick as a child with smallpox. He's been through duel, and he's got this ball of lead near his heart. So it's taken its toll a little bit at this time, and he gives his horse up and has another individual ride who's sicker than he is. And they would look at him and say, going through the brush, and he's getting, cut up, and, he's tired, he's beaten, and the guy, his men are like, wow, look at Jackson, and he's just like hickory, he's just tough, he's hard, and because it's the hardest wood known, and that would stick, is they would call him Old Hickory from that point on as a general. So it did stick. So Jackson stood for the idea, what we already talked about, as ordinary people, because he was ordinary. He came from a very humble background, as we talked about in his bio as a young child, but they don't tell you that in the book. So I just wanted to bring that up. And they also loved him, his supporters, because of that. So he's got good leadership. He demonstrates that as a general in 1812, and then he also demonstrates, his humble beginnings, and then he gets the victory there at the Battle of New Orleans. So he becomes a war hero, and then and also this is after Florida, obviously, and Florida has been taken by Jackson, so that kind of pumps him up a little bit more. even more so than 1812. And he's puts that on his resume. I have that done. And then we're going to get into the election of 1824. So we're gonna go through the election of 1824, and then we're probably going to go ahead and stop there, and then go over John Quincy Adams with that. So we got this election of 1824, and Jackson's going to run, and he runs against the following individuals. Okay, so his opponents are John Quincy Adams, okay, Henry Clay, who has already been, brought up before when we talked about regionalism and all these, the North and South and the West all splitting up. So we got Henry Clay, William Crawford of Georgia, and then we have Jackson receiving basically. Check this out. He receives the most. Jackson receives the most electoral votes, but not a majority. So the majority is going to rule. So according to the Constitution, the House of Representatives have to step in, and then they're going to decide who wins the election. So it's our representatives who are, it's the Electoral College. So the choice here was between two individuals. It's either going to be Adams or Jackson, because the other individual's out of the race with the amount of votes that didn't count. So the two basically have received the most votes, like we said, and then the Speaker of the House, who's Henry Clay. Now he's out of the race, but he's not out of the decision making. He decides that he does not like Jackson, and Clay's like, hey, and he tells his friends, his buddies, to all vote for John Quincy Adams, and they do. They all vote for Adams. And then when he does that, John Quincy has enough then to go ahead and take the office with Clay's help. So Clay couldn't do it by him. I'm sorry, not Clay, but John Quincy couldn't do it by himself, but he needed the votes and the support from Henry Clay. So you got to catch that. You got to get that point right there. All right, because this is known as the corrupt bargain. And you see the corruption there just a little bit, but there is definitely a bargain. So what's Clay looking at? Okay, here's the deal. Clay's looking at Secretary of State. And that's what he's going to tell John Quincy Adams. I want to be Secretary of State. And he does. He's appointed to, Secretary of State. And then that leads up to the presidency, like it has before. So it's just a stepping stone further to what he wants to get. So they have this deal, and the bargain. And okay, I'll give you the supporters, okay, get you the presidency, and you give me Secretary of State, and you get the votes. So that's what happened. And of course, Jackson's going ballistic over this. We're going nuts. And he was just, the book says, fuming mad. I wouldn't even want to be around him for a long time that day. I mean, that would have been a really long day. I don't even know what was coming out of that man's mouth. But that was the corrupt bargain. So you gotta catch that, because we're going to talk about John Quincy Adams and his presidency here, and how it really doesn't really kick in, and he didn't earn the presidency. It was pretty much that corrupt bargain with Clay that's going to get in the presidency. So then we'll go ahead and talk about that. All right, so that's the end of chapter 3, chapter 10. That's the end of chapter 10, section 3, which is part 1, and we're on the age of Jackson. So we're going to start part 2 in just a second.